a beautiful thing. It grows to the quiver of a fife that sings. I can take it with the wave of my hand and place it upon my music stand. Such a beautiful thing. Such a beautiful thing.
Ready to start. So again, thank you all for joining us. So nice to have you all here on this last Sunday in January. Title of my talk today, and now for something completely different. Okay, so just start with saying, a blue moon is an extra full moon. There's actually usually 13 moons in the year, and we have 12 months. So there's occasionally this extra moon in a month, and we call that a blue moon. And extraordinary things are supposed to happen when you have a blue moon. So this Sunday is actually a blue Sunday, because on this Sunday is the 5th Sunday in January, and usually you only have 4 Sundays in a month, but this month we have 5 Sundays. Sometimes you have 5 Sundays. So I'm calling this a blue Sunday. For one, it gave me an extra opportunity to talk this month. So how lucky are all we? And I'm just ready for something extraordinary to happen. And that was my focus, and that was my energy. And I kept thinking of that old expression that came from Monty Python. And now for something completely different. So Monty Python, as you know, was a British sketch group, comedy sketch group that were popular in the 70s and the 80s. They had a very popular TV show, and they made several movies. And every once in a while, they would go along, and then they'd say, and now for something completely different. And then they would switch to something maybe that was a little more bizarre and totally unrelated to what they were doing before. And it was just their way of piecing together things that were actually kind of bizarre and unrelated. And of course, in Miracles, speaks of the future state in sometimes very bizarre ways, and sometimes in ways that seem to have no relation to the current reality. So that's what calls to mind. And Reverend Peter read that lesson from the workbook. I seek a future different from the past. I seek a future different from the past. And in that, it said, from new perception of the world, there comes a future very different from the past, completely different. So, people brush over this workbook lesson. And I think a lot of people think that it's about their personal future. So I'm seeking a personal future that is different maybe than the personal past that I had. But I actually think it means something much broader and more all-inclusive than that. So it's not about trying to, and I've talked about this several times before, it's not about trying to rise to the top 1% of, society, so it's not about rising to the top 1% of health and abundance and love and relationships, because if you're in the top 1%, that means that there's 99% below you. And the trouble with that is Course in Miracles teaches us that those 99%, they are you. It's all of us. So we don't want to rise to the top. I've also spoken about how, the old expression, the cream rises to the top. In the days before homogenized milk, some of you probably still know, or even buy raw milk. In the days before homogenized milk, the cream rises to the top. And I said a couple years ago in a sermon, the cream rises to the top, but you shouldn't. You don't want to rise to the top, because again, if you rise to the top, that means there's all this stuff below you. And that stuff below you actually is you. Those people below you that you think might be below you are you. So when the Course says, I seek a future different from the past, it's actually talking about something else. It's talking about an experience of reality, of physical reality, that is very different than the experience of physical reality that we now experience, or that most people now experience. And that's it's a challenge. And that is something completely different. Now, A Course in Miracles has certain core concepts. And what I feel guided to put out here, you can understand that I've read the complete A Course in Miracles maybe 45 times, maybe 50 times, because I read it every year when I teach a class. And I've been doing this for 40 years, almost 40 years. And there were many years when I was teaching more than one class. So, probably 45 times, maybe 50 times, I don't know. And, it doesn't make me any special or anyway, but it does mean that I'm pretty aware of what the book says, and I'm pretty aware of the key concepts in the book. So there is a concept in the book called the real world, and this creates a certain confusion for some people because how the Course talks about the real world is so out there that people think it must mean they're talking about heaven. But the Course is very clear. The real world is not heaven. The real world is this world healed. It's the healed dream. The real world is a world, a perceptual world that reflects reality. So this is what it says. This is at least part of what it says. It's a longer passage, but this is part of what it says about the real world. It says the real world is not like this. It is not lit with artificial light, and night comes not upon it. There is no day that brightens and grows dim. There is no loss. There is nothing here but shines and shines forever. Okay, it's not talking about heaven. It's talking about this world healed. So this world healed is something completely different. It doesn't have night. It is only day. And we don't have any container for that, to hold that. But A Course in Miracles, I believe, is challenging us to let go and let things be as they are going to be. So some of you know that, Community Miracle Center also teaches some A Course of Love classes. Reverend Kim teaches one of our A Course of Love classes, and I've been in the A Course of Love class for, 5 years now. We keep reading the book. And this passage that I'm next going to quote is from A Course of Love. And I always love this passage because it explains more that A Course in Miracles passage that I just read about the real world being a time of no night. This is what it says from A Course of Love. This is a harmony and cooperation that might one day extend to the sun, and a demonstration that the sun need not rise, or perhaps need not set, and Earth would still be safely spinning in its orbit. So the sun doesn't have to rise and set. We could have day, and the Earth could keep spinning around, and everything could be just fine. And you say, well, how can that be? That, we'd burn up. The science isn't there. I don't know. But then the passage continues with this, and I really like this too. Again, this is from A Course of Love. Now, if this were to happen, scientists would quickly determine the existence of a natural law that allowed this event to happen. It would require the reworking of many previously known, quote, scientific facts, but this would not prevent them from discovering new scientific facts. So, we're hooked into the science facts that, we're used to. But, if you really look through the history, there's been all kinds of science that changed when new facts came forth. Science, there's a thing about science right now that always riles me. Science has been elevated to this godlike state. During the pandemic, we hear follow the science. Well, science is not God. I don't follow science. I follow Holy Spirit. And Holy Spirit guides me how to navigate in the world. The Nazis in World War II were following a whole lot of science that said the white Aryan race was superior to the other races. They had a lot of science about it, but hey, that's where science can lead you. So we need to have a little bit of suspicion about science. It's not always correct, and it's changing all the time. Course says, remember how many times you thought you knew all the, quote, facts you needed for judgment and how wrong you were? Is there anyone who has not had this experience? Would you know how many times you merely thought you were right without ever realizing that you were wrong? So we think we have all the facts to make these calls, but we don't. And we've all had experiences where we saw that we were wrong when we got new facts. And what the Course is saying, a lot of times you were wrong, you just never ever realized it. So we have to be open up. We have to be led by Holy Spirit. And we have to understand that science is always changing and things can be completely different than the way they are. Another page in A Course in Miracles, it's challenging our whole belief in death. And it says, swear not to die. You holy Son of God, you make a bargain that you cannot keep. The Son of Life cannot be killed. He is immortal as his Father. So Course in Miracles is saying, stop promising to die. Stop dying. We don't die. And what I get from A Course in Miracles is that we can manifest something completely different here in this world where death as it usually appears just doesn't happen the way it has appeared to us before. In the Song of Prayer pamphlet, it says this, we call it death, but it is liberty. It does not come in forms that seem to be thrust down in pain upon unwilling flesh, but as a gentle welcome to release. So death does not have to and should not be coming in a form that's like at the end of a debilitating sickness. That's not the way things are supposed to be. And actually, A Course in Miracles says that's actually not even the way that they are. That's just the way that we're hallucinating that they are. And we're supposed to move past that hallucination and get ready for something completely different. So people, of course, always want to know, well, what would that look like? So, there's examples, in the Hindu tradition and the yogi tradition, Yogananda, they lived a pure life, they meditated a lot, and at the end of their times, they gathered their key disciples around them, they say goodbye, they go into a meditation, and they never come back. It's called the Maha Samadhi, the Grand Samadhi. They just go off, and there's, many reports of things like that happening. And sure, why not? Why can't you just do it consciously and just say, okay, it's time to go. It has been fun. Bye-bye. That sounds pretty good, but I'm open to it actually being very different from that as well. Okay, look at Star Trek. In Star Trek, when they want to leave, they get in the transporter and they shimmer and their bodies just go somewhere else. Okay, so if our body is being held together by our conscious focus, when we get so enlightened that we can just shift our conscious focus, why wouldn't the body just like shimmer out of existence, just like in Star Trek? I'm sure science would find a way to explain that if that started happening. I think about all the things that happened in Star Trek that actually came true. Remember the flip phones? They had those communicators. They were like flip phones. 20, 30 years later, everybody had a flip phone. Hey, and remember these? They used to walk in Star Trek, around in Star Trek with tablets. And they'd be in a meeting and they'd hit the thing and they were walking around with this little tablet and it was interfaced with their computer. And now we have tablets. So a lot of things that Star Trek thought of actually came true. Why couldn't we just transport out of here? I think it's certainly possible. Okay, when I was a teenager and in my young 20s, I dreamed of being a science fiction author, and I loved science fiction, and I still love science fiction. Never became a science fiction author, but I dreamed of becoming a science fiction author. And in one time, I was trying to put together this: what would the future look like? Because I was going to write a book that was based in the future. And I had this vision that in the future, we wouldn't be quite the way we are now, that we wouldn't move around as much as we seem to, and that we would be mostly in our rooms and in our homes, but that we would interface with these television sets that we could talk to and would talk back to us, and that we could connect to everybody in the world through this talking television set. And this caused us to spend a whole lot more time in our homes and in our rooms, but we still went out occasionally, but it was a very different society. And I was going to write a whole novel based on this reality. Okay, I never wrote the novel. It took 50 years, but look, that's what's been happening the past year. You know, we have computers. Look at what we're doing now. We're talking into the computer. The people talk back to us. It's a video screen. You know, and I just really have to get that I had that idea 50 years ago. It took 50 years, but it's kind of the reality now. You know, so I heard something at the beginning of the pandemic when the first shelter in place was being enforced, and said, you know, it took 50 years, but marijuana is now legal to buy and haircuts are illegal to have. So it took 50 years, but the hippies won. Marijuana's legal, haircuts aren't. So it's amazing when you think about what actually sometimes happens. So I don't know what the experience of a healed real world is going to look like, where death doesn't look like it normally does, where there isn't sickness, where there isn't day and night, where it's always day. I don't know what it's going to look like. And A Course in Miracles doesn't get into what it is going to look like. What A Course in Miracles does is tell you what is not going to look like. It's not going to look like certain things. And it wants us to be aware of that, because it's our job to recognize what's not right and allow what is right just to be of itself. We can't know what is right because all of our knowledge and information comes from the past. And we seek a future that is different from the past, so we can't put it in our own past images. As I said earlier, death does not come in forms that seem to be thrust down upon unwilling flesh. Right now, the majority of people leave this plane after a debilitating, painful illness. That's the way the majority leave. Okay? That's not supposed to be that way. And it's my job when I see that, not to pretend that I don't see it, but just to know that that's not the truth and that's not the way it's supposed to be. And in that quotation about the real world, remember I said it was longer than I read before. So I want to read parts that I didn't read before. It says, the real world is not like this. It has no buildings, and there are no streets where people walk alone and separate. There are no stores where people buy an endless list of things they do not need. So they're talking about a really radically different world, but you know what? It's already manifesting. We don't go to stores anymore. We buy everything online. It gets delivered right to our door, right to our house, right to our room. People are even doing it, of course, to buy groceries and things. You know, people don't go to stores anymore. So all of these things, you know, are kind of already happening. And once they do happen, however it is, the sun doesn't rise and set anymore. Science is just going to find a way to explain that, because that's what science does. It just explains what's going on. And that's what it will always do. So my whole purpose of this whole talk today is to just let it all go. Let our way of perceiving the world go. And let's really embrace what Monty Python told us in the 70s. And now for something completely different. That's my talk for today. Thank you so much.
A flower is a beautiful thing. It grows to the quiver of a fife that sings. I can take it with the wave of my hand and place it upon my music stand. Such a beautiful thing. Such a beautiful thing.